Hello and welcome. My name is Aditya, and you're listening to a conversation discussing the role of AI in education. So it's 2024, and AI has become an integral part of our daily lives, especially in how we teach and learn. And I'm the founder of Pmfm.ai, which is an AI bot creation tool. And I have been very interested in covering and exploring the use cases of how AI is impacting education. So the goal of this podcast is to dive deep into different aspects of AI in education, and we will explore its current applications, discuss its potential benefits and challenges, and realize how it can benefit the education sector at large. So, in today's episode, I'm thrilled to have with me Darren Coxon. Darren Coxon is the founder of CoxonAI, which is a consultancy specializing in integrating AI into schools and colleges. And he's been an educator for 25 years. And he's also an early customer of Pmfm.ai. So let's talk first about Darren and learn about him. So Darren, can you tell us more about your background and yourself?
Sure thing. It's great to be here, Aditya. Thank you for inviting me. So look, yeah, as I say, I've been around for about 25 years in various different roles in education. About the last 10 years, I began my career as an English literature teacher, and then about the last 10 years, I've moved into managing groups of schools. And it was actually one of the last schools that I managed where we introduced AI, generative AI, one of the very, very early adopters. This was way back in sort of January of 2023. And I could immediately see the potential, even though we were back at the very beginning when it really wasn't that useful or that good, quite frankly. I could still see that this had the potential to be majorly disruptive, both potentially in a good way, but also in a possibly a negative way as well. You know, we had New York State banning AI, generative AI, ChatGPT, after only a few weeks after it had been released, and then they rolled that back. So we could already see that the education community as a large, as a whole, were quite nervous about AI. So for the last year or so, I've been really supporting schools all over the world, pretty well every continent, just helping them understand how it works, how to leverage it, not to be scared of it, not to worry too much, just to play with it and just to enjoy what it's able to offer, but also be mindful of the potential risks.
Yeah, and what do you, when you say that you're working with these schools, what do you think are some of the AI applications or for integration that you think that these schools use? Because I think, as far as I remember, for example, in early 23, for applied AI, the best possible tool was the newly launched ChatGPT. And as you rightly mentioned, there was this fear about how it can be used for all sorts of probably unethical things. So when you say that you are doing this integration work with schools, how different is that from teaching them using ChatGPT, or does it include other things as well? What are some of the applications?
Yes, I mean, I kind of split my training. I most of my work at the moment is training, face-to-face and online training of schools and leadership teams as well. Tends to fall into two camps. So I will show teachers how to use ChatGPT, Claude, Google Gemini to a lesser extent. I think it's not quite so useful at the moment. And also some of the open source AIs like Mistral and Llama. And so I'll do a bit of work with the schools on effective prompting, on how to introduce documents into the workflow, and the kind of fairly straightforward stuff. But then I'm also looking at, obviously, I several schools introduced PMFM into those schools, and they're looking at that and exploring it at the moment. I quite like the fact you can sort of train in inverted commas, but to sort of modify the behavior, if you like, of the bot and introduce a knowledge base. And it's quite neat and it's quite easy to use. So they quite like it. But then, you know, when it comes to student facing AI, which is quite limited at the moment, if you're under 13, it's quite challenging. Really, the only platform at the moment that's looking at it in any sort of seriousness, and I think it's because they've got the money to do so, is Magic School. So they, you know, they've got quite a neat student-facing AI bot. So I show them that, but I also look at other AI apps that have other platforms that have AI inside them. So one I show is TurboScribe, which is quite a nice AI for transcribing video and audio. And there are one or two others, but I mean, I would say broadly speaking, 60 to 70% of what I do when I'm training schools tends to work with the frontier models. And really, it's ChatGPT and Claude are the two I use the most.
Okay. And what do you think, how receptive are these schools in, you know, listening to you and adopting AI? Or do they just blindly follow your what you tell them to do, or are they open to learning more about, for example, the nitty-gritty of how it works, like using knowledge bases and learning more about the challenges or the use of different LLMs? How exactly how interested are schools in adopting AI? And the reason I say this is that because a lot of like other industries, for example, healthcare or finance, there is still a bit of there's not as much adoption as there should be for even law as well. So I think education is one sector that is doing far ahead in AI adoption. So how do you think as being someone who's doing this, as like, if you can tell us the mode of the education field?
Yeah, so I would say that when a school approaches me, it's usually the school leadership that approach me. And if it isn't, then I usually speak to the school leadership quite soon afterwards. And if they've approached me, they're obviously interested in understanding and learning more. And so I tend to find that the schools I go and work in and train staff at are very receptive. You know, they're keen to learn and they're interested and they're curious, and they're not always bought in completely, but usually by the end of the day, I'll get people. I had someone come up to me after a training course just last week and say, he said, I was a complete skeptic at the beginning of the day, and he said he actually used the term, now I'm an AI evangelist. I thought, well, that was a big shift in one day, so clearly I did something right there. But I think broadly speaking, education is not that far ahead of healthcare or finance. If anything, in some respects, it might be a little bit further behind, mainly because education is profoundly a people and trust-based business. And I'm using business in the broadest term, transactions between people, not necessarily financial, just the whole industry around education is based on trust and it's based on human interaction, much more so than finance. And to some extent, obviously you've got hospitals, which are very public facing, but there's a lot that goes on in the background in healthcare, which is not, customer facing, if you like. Education is, at every single level, education is a people business. And the fear is that AI starts to take some of that personalization away, that it's not giving young people, children, students, what they need to grow. Because education is not just learning stuff for an exam. Education is about learning how to live in the world and be a decent human being and make an impression and, make your voice heard and, all of those sorts of things. That's education. Learning how to, do addition and multiplication and, and the kings of England. That's just knowledge. Those are just facts. Education's way more than that. So I think AI is a long way off being able to effectively impact the interpersonal aspects of education. That's fine. Well, we don't need it to do that. That's what humans are for. Young people, students, they need adults in the room. They need role models. They need people to to trust and to rely on and to learn from, just to be as human beings. So I think AI doesn't sit in that space, and I don't think it should sit in that space. Where AI, I think, sits better is in freeing teachers up, basic stuff at the moment, freeing teachers' time up, doing some assessment, doing some planning. That's where I think it's creating resources. I mean, you've probably seen on LinkedIn, I've been publishing quite a bit on creating digital resources using AI. So just, fairly simple coding that AI can do pretty well. And it can start creating resources for teachers to use and reuse, because obviously digital can be reused. So I think that's probably where it sits better. But probably the main reason, if I'm honest, why not many sectors are really fully embracing generative AI, because at the moment it's still not very good. I mean, it still makes mistakes. It still hallucinates. I just had to say this week I was working with some spreadsheets and some data, and it just got some, and I was using Claude, which is probably at the moment the most powerful of all of the LLMs, and it was still making lots of mistakes. And it's really basic stuff because it can't count. I mean, people get frustrated, but large language models really struggle to count. Just basic stuff like, count the number of A's, B's, and C's in this column. It really struggles to do that. It's just not how it's made. It's just not how it's been created. It's not how a transformer model works. So I think that's why at the moment, people seem to think that they want to see a large language model as replacing as much as of the grunt work and as much as the basic kind of admin as possible. And to some extent it can do that, but I still think it falls down. And as soon as it falls down, as soon as someone says, well, it can't count, they're like, well, it's useless. People tend to do, it's very binary at the moment. It's like, it's either the answer to all our prayers or it's completely hopeless. I'm more of the kind of, I'll use it for 20 or 30% of what I do, but I'll not let it anywhere near this sort of 70 or 80, the other 70 or 80%, because it's just not very good. So I think just sort of, that's why, not just in education, but I think broadly, we're not seeing the adoption that we might want to, because, unlike you and I, most people won't take the time to work out what it's good at. They'll use it once or twice and they'll think, well, it didn't do that very well. And so then they just give up.
I think you have brought up a very interesting point. I think the other thing that I think is holding back the AI adoption is probably the idea that we're sharing very personal data about ourselves to these LLMs. And I think especially in places like in fields like banking or law, these things could become like a serious safety matter. So I feel that there is a sense of, user or better laws around user security or user data when it comes to accessing LLMs. Do you think that that is not the case with education? In education, it's strictly or more so about the fact that we are limited by just the quality of these LLMs, and educators thinking that these LLMs are detrimental to a student's development and that they are helping them more than necessary. Or, for example, if someone is doing like a homework bot, and I see this as on Pmfm as well, that an educator will make a homework bot to help these students, assist them, but what the students will do is try to get around and just get the answers without making any significant effort.
Yeah.
So do you think it's that, or do you think that it's just the quality that is problematic?
Yeah, it's a bit of both, I think. I think the at the sort of the teacher interface level, there's that fear that, well, that there's that sort of disinterest around the fact that it doesn't do what, and particularly if you don't use the sort of the better versions of these AIs, they tend not to give a very good response. But no, I think there's also the worry that AI is going to make students stupid and lazy. That they're not going to work. They're just going to kind of get ChatGPT to write their essays for them and blah blah blah. But honestly, it's a bit of a tiresome argument, because students always cheated. I mean, since the beginning of time, people at school have cheated. I mean, it's just easier now, and it's probably possibly a bit easier, and maybe takes even less effort to cheat than it used to. I mean, you know, back when I was at school, I mean, there was less probably when I mean, I went to school in the 1980s, and it was before the internet. It was actually much harder to cheat. But since the internet, it's actually been fairly easy because you've had essay mills, you've been able to download essays from the internet and slightly change them or what have you. So I suppose now with ChatGPT it's a bit easier. But I think the bigger issue is the fact that, you know, more broadly, teachers are realizing they're going to have to start changing how they assess students, and that's not necessarily something that most schools and teachers want to do, because, you know, we've got a tried and tested formula and it kind of works as good as, and it's not necessarily something that people want to have to totally reinvent assessment. But to be honest with you, we're probably going to have to, because not only do we have, you know, coursework being impacted by AI, but it won't be long before, you know, what I'm wearing here, can't tell. I could be wearing Meta Ray-Ban glasses here, you wouldn't know, and I could be, you know, in my exam, and the answers could be coming up on the, you know, and no one could see. You know, okay, Meta Ray-Ban glasses at the moment, they're reasonably obvious, but won't be long before they're not. So we're going to have to change assessment. We've got no choice. We're going to have to work out what's the best way to judge quality, and what are the qualities that we best need to judge. It's not just about, you know, measuring the number of A grades a student gets. It's also what are the qualities that we need to nurture and develop and push out into the world when kids leave school. So I think it's probably both, but you're probably right, Aditya. It's probably at its most sort of primal level, it's a nervousness around, you know, what the hell do we do? Who the hell are we? What is our interaction with students supposed to be anymore? And I think we're only just starting. And I mean, certainly when I speak to schools, I say, look, we're so early in the game with AI. I liken it to when you won't remember this because you're too young, but when the Sinclair ZX Spectrum computer came out, which was a really early, like really one of the earliest home computers that was around. And that's kind of where we are at the moment with AI. You know, it's just been introduced into our homes. We're playing with it. We're kind of excited and kind of bored and kind of frustrated with it in equal measure. But it won't be long before it's completely ubiquitous. It's in everything. It's everywhere. It's seamless with us. You know, we merge with AI, not necessarily in a neural interface way, but just in an experiential way. We just merge. It becomes part of the fabric of who we are. And I think that's the way we're heading, whether we like it or not. And AI doesn't care what you think about it. It's going ahead whether we like it or not. So our job as adults, not just as educators and teachers, as adults, is to work out how do we best prepare our young people so they can most effectively integrate into this world that's sort of arriving.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think these points, but I think that, you know, like, for example, when I went to college, we had access to internet for most of these assessments. Now, let's say that colleges don't necessarily restrict usage of these AI tools like ChatGPT, and AI exponentially gets better over the years. Do you think that there would be no specific assessments left for students, or, you know, because if that happens, if there's this sort of neural bridging, then in that case, no matter how difficult exams are, or no matter how creative educators get, they would not be able to outdo AI. Students would be easily able to just, you know, get the answers what they're looking for in the blink of an eye. So at that point, is there any possible solution to, you know, evolving with this, or do you think there should be like a fundamental shift in how education even works?
Yeah, of course. I mean, for me, it's fairly obvious, and it begins. It's like you have to work backwards. Why do we sit? Let's say, just take K-12 education as an example. Why do students sit exams? Well, there are two reasons really why students sit exams. The first reason is a leaving certificate to get to the next stage in their education, university. And the second is to judge the quality of the education they're being provided. In other words, to judge the teacher. It's not you learning maths GCSE or learning the Kings of England is not in any way, shape or form necessarily going to prepare you to be an active and useful member of the human race. It's just not. These are useful skills, some of them, you know, it's good to have cultural capital. Don't get me wrong. These are good things to have. But as a prerequisite for becoming, you know, successful in life, it's just not the case. I mean, you can look at, you know, Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, really good examples. They all dropped out from college. So we know that it's not like a prerequisite to be successful in the world that you need these. So there are other reasons. So, okay, so if that's the case, if we reach the point, and I think it will happen quite soon, where we can no longer trust any form of terminal examination, you know, final, because even if they're sitting in a locked room, there will be some ability to augment that teachers will not know, you know, it's just going to happen. It's just obvious that it's going to happen. So if that's the case, then the universities then have to change. And actually, I think the sector that's about to be disrupted the most first will be higher education. It won't be K-12 education. And there's one primary reason why. Under 18s need to be looked after by adults. Okay, you still have to have children, adults going to work, and their children need to be looked after by somebody else. Okay, so you can't completely, you know, we talk about home education and online home education. That's fine, but it's quite niche because still 95% of the world, probably at least 95% of the world, needs to go out, leave their house in the morning and go and do a job and then come home, which means that 95% of the student population of the world needs somebody to look after them. Well, that's probably going to be schools and for the foreseeable future, some form of childcare anyway. That's not the case at university. Okay, so university students, as soon as you reach 18, they can do whatever they want. They can learn online, and this is what's happening in the UK right now. We're about to go through a very, very significant market correction in higher education, with lots of smaller, less well-funded universities closing, simply because international students aren't coming to the UK in as high numbers. The fees that are being charged to home students are not high enough to the costs. It's just not. It's not a viable model. So the university system in the UK is not a viable model. If we see a massive disruption at the university level, plus we're also seeing students voting with their feet in the UK and not going to university at all because it's so expensive, and they're getting into 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100,000 pounds worth of debt, just like the college education in the US. Students are thinking, I can do an apprenticeship, you know, I can do some online learning, and AI will play a really big part in that moving forward, and I can get a job, and I can learn on the job, and I can, even at age 16, I don't even need to do A-levels, I can just leave age 16. That will have a fundamental impact on schools, probably in the next 3 to 5 years, certainly in the next 5 to 10 years. It's not going to happen overnight. So I think if you look at it from the macro perspective, we're almost certainly going to see, going all the way back to what we've just started talking about just now, that the notion of assessment, because assessment fundamentally is a point in the process, you know, it's a point in the journey. If that long-term journey changes, then, you know, if the destination changes, all of the points in the journey are going to have to change as well. It's just common sense. So I think schools have to wake up to that fact. They have to wake up to the fact that they need to be preparing now for the fact that actually what will almost certainly happen is it won't be some massive revolution in schools. I just think that's complete nonsense. It's just not going to happen. There'll be a quiet revolution, evolution, sorry. There'll be a quiet evolution in schools where lots of students will just vote with their feet. And it doesn't mean they will necessarily leave the building. It will mean that they'll check out mentally from classes, and they'll just literally go through the motions. And then questions will be asked about the quality of the education system when, you know, giving students what they need, which is why I think schools have to start looking at the whole person. They have to start developing the whole person. They have to be developing problem-solving skills, really good communication skills. Students need to learn to do what we're doing now. They need to learn how to present online. They need to learn how to grow a strong digital presence. They need to work on their digital footprint. There are so many things about living in the 21st century which are completely alien to the 20th century, and yet we're still stuck in a very 19th century, 20th century approach to how we educate. And the world is, we know this. This has been talked about for 20 years. I'm not saying anything new here. The world has moved into an entirely different framework, and yet we're still stuck in the old one. And we're sort of dragging our students along with us, but it won't be long before they're like, no, sorry, but that's not what I want. You need to show me how to, start a business online. You need to show me how to do this. You need to show me how to solve real world problems. Because if you don't, you know what, I'm just going to look elsewhere. So I think that's why we're at a real point of tension in education. I feel it because I sit right in the center of this. We're at a real point of tension at the moment. And if we're not careful, that elastic between the system that we have and the real world, it's just going to break. It's just going to stretch and stretch, and eventually it will break.
Yeah, I think these are very interesting points, because I think even before AI, there was this intellectual curiosity that, you could do things without going to college, and to a certain extent, especially in computers and software, this is quite possible, and a lot of people do it. But because, there is this requirement of getting like a degree or leaving certificate, it's just a path that's already been laid out for you, that without this leaving certificate, you cannot get into college, and without getting a degree, you cannot get a job. So maybe there's like this, there's like a shift, as you said, a quiet evolution that could happen at all levels, not just with students, but also with educators. Speaking of that, do you think that AI could completely replace teachers and educators?
Only if we allow it to. So, if we carry on teaching in the way that we taught for the last 250 years, which most schools and most teachers are, and it's no, look, I'm not personally blaming anyone here. I did the same myself. I think that probably yes. You could in time. Will it replace teachers in the near future? No. It's, as I said, it's not good enough. But give it time, get it embodied, give it, flesh it out, give it some, I could be like talking to you now, and you could be an AI avatar. And I know, because I work with Stephanie Sotend on Matrix Tutors. So she's got Matrix holograms. She just released a hologram last week, and it's her. And you think, well, that's her, but it's not. It's her. It doesn't even look like an AI avatar. It looks like exactly like her, speaking, the voice, everything is identical. It won't be long before we have those ability to have those conversations, where I can be working on a project at home or, in the class, and I could be talking about AI. And just on the sort of subject about upskilling, this point about what is it to be educated and what is it to be able to add value into the world? Because essentially education is just a process by which you get ready to add value. You're a leech. Students are leeches throughout all of their education. They're taking and they're taking and they're taking, and they're not giving back. But the whole point of education is like a battery, like a rechargeable battery. You're storing academic energy, if you like, to the point where you can then give it back, and you then become a productive member of society. And that's the whole point, frankly, of education in its most basic form. But if you look at it from that respect, you might have seen that just a couple of days ago, it's taken me a month to get there. It's taken me a month of backwards and forwards. But in 3 hours, I completely built a full stack web application in 3 hours. And I'm an English teacher, okay? I am not a computer coder. I have no idea how to write JavaScript. I've got no idea. I don't understand how any of this stuff works. Well, I do actually, and I actually do understand the process now really, really well, because I've built it from scratch. But in terms of coding, I haven't got a clue. I built literally from zero. All I had was ChatGPT, and I had Visual Studio Code to put this code in, and I had GitHub to push the code to, and then I had Versal to deploy the code. I had those four applications from a 0, 0, 0 base. In 3 hours, I built a full stack web application. You cannot tell me that's not a big deal when it comes to our entire education system, because I'm an English teacher and I managed to build a full stack web application with ChatGPT. So, and we are literally at the ZX spectrum stage of AI. When I have an assistant who never forgets anything that I do, who I can literally say, right, what we're going to do today is we've got this problem to solve. And you just work step by step, and you write the code and you test it and you debug it, and it goes. It's just, for me, I was like, I can't, and I was working on it again yesterday, and I've literally got the whole thing to work seamlessly end to end. I mean, how is that even possible? Because I've got ChatGPT and I'm like, this doesn't work. And it's like, oh yeah, well, you need to change this down here. I'm like, okay, so I do it and it works. So this is why I think we need to be very, very sort of realistic about the future of education. Because if I'm able to code a full stack web application in 3 hours, that tells you something about the way things are heading.
Yeah, that's so true, and I can say that about myself as well, even though I'm an engineer, but still I rely on these AI tools like Cursor to, learn more about other things, and I'm able to get so much done as opposed to probably like a year or two ago when I really didn't have any other resource to even get like a basic idea about anything. And I think as like in the coming years now, our primary have like this text interface, and then I think we will move toward a voice interface and probably like an avatar interface. I think it'll just become easier and easier over the years.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think so. I just want to conclude this podcast with one final question for you. Is that how do you think what do you think is the future of AI in the short term, in the next 5 years, and especially in education? And how can educators at the moment adopt faster and create better resources for, training other educators, not just them, but also students?
Well, I think 5 years is not, in AI, 5 years isn't short term, 5 years is long term. 5 weeks is probably short term. Although I've noted it has slowed down a bit, to be fair. This year, if you compare to 24 compared to 23, it is slower. The pace of it has slowed down a bit. I mean, last year was just insane. We've not had particularly new models of either ChatGPT or Claude, at least in the last 6 months. But yeah, so I think the next 3 to 5 years, as I said, we're just simply going to see AI just become more ubiquitous. It's just going to become more ingrained into everything, all of our platforms, everything that we do. We'll see local AI. So, Apple are releasing semantic AI on their devices. So we're going to see much more context-driven AI that's very, very specific to a function, rather than at the moment we've got very generalized, ChatGPT is a very general tool. It's a bit like a Swiss Army knife. We're definitely going to see far more, kind of bespoke. I mean, this is why I quite like, the stuff that I worked on with your platform, because I was able to narrow down the AI to literally almost like one poem that it would become an expert on. So it's super, super narrow. And I think that's where we're going to see the most uses. So rather than like Swiss Army knife tools, we'll see a very specific AI, which, focuses on being an absolute expert in one particular exam board, in one particular subject, because it's just been trained on everything. I think Google Notebook LM, although I don't think it's that good at the moment, if I'm honest, it's a bit glitchy and it's pretty basic. I think that movement towards seeing, an AI which is trained on just everything to do with one syllabus. So we know it's highly unlikely to hallucinate, because it's literally only drawing from that one, from the RAG database. It's literally just, drawing from that one source of knowledge. So I think we're probably going to see that. We'll see a lot more voice, as you mentioned. So, and Notebook LM is a good example. The next version of Notebook LM, you'll be able to have conversations with AI avatar, AI voices that are trained on that data. So it's almost like a lecture or seminar format where you'll be able to have conversations with the data, like voice conversations with the data. But in terms of your second point over getting people upskilled, getting people ready for the future, and how can people sort of help themselves, I think just getting onto, I mean, what I do, I mean, the only reason I'm doing this now is because of LinkedIn. You know, I wouldn't be doing any of this if it wasn't for LinkedIn. It's absolutely the best source of knowledge and ideas. It's also lots of noise on there, and a lot of people say the same thing 10 times, and it's like, well, you need to change the record. But I think if you've my sort of, I urge people to, if you've got any ideas, if something works in your classroom, share it. I mean, probably the best person that I think of is Matthew Weems, who's the deputy head in Romania, the school in Romania. He's done a brilliant job, because actually what he has done is he's shared all of his successes and failures on LinkedIn. It's really helpful. People we need, because I don't know all the answers. I'm not in the classroom. You know, I'm teaching teachers, but I'm not physically in the classroom. Someone like him is. So he's able to try these things. Alex Gray in Dubai is the same. They're able to try these things and then share whether they worked or not. So that's my sort of my parting kind of piece of advice is share, because we don't know. You know, I might be quite noisy on LinkedIn, but I don't know all the answers. And so if you're using a platform, if you use Pmfm, or if you use Claude or ChatGPT or NotebookLM or whatever it is, and something works, share it and share how it worked and why it worked, because actually that's how we all learn together.
Right. I think transparency really helps other educators, and it can even help in a faster, accelerated adoption of AI. And yes, I think as in the coming years, we'll have better device AI, we'll have voice, and we'll have fine tuning, and I think it's just going to get better over the years. All right. Thank you for joining this podcast. It's the first episode, and it really means a lot. Thank you for being here. So I'll wrap it up now. Thank you, Darren.
Been a pleasure. Thanks, Aditya. Good to talk.